All right, we're back, and it is time to talk about Chapter 5, which is the chapter that's going to be covering how we pay attention. So, hopefully, you will find this interesting. This is one of my favorite topics in cognition right now. My original interest had been memory, and now I've shifted over into attention, so it's been kind of fun for me. Anyway, on to our show. In this chapter, we're going to talk about how our attention system is selective, how priming can help to determine what we select to pay attention to, and then the effects of dividing our attention. So let's get to work. All right, so the basic characteristics of attention. Um, there are lots of different theories that explain our attention system, but all of them agree that our attention is limited. There's only so much information we can pay attention to at one time. There's only so many streams of attention that we can pay attention to fully, and so there is a limited capacity to our attention system. Our attention system is flexible. We can shift our attention without even noticing that we are shifting it. I had a comment on one of my lectures where I was talking about um, the figure ground phenomenon and how you can either have this ambiguous figure be the thing that you're noticing, or you can have that ambiguous figure be the thing you're noticing, but you can't have both of them at the same time. And the question was, what about those of us who can? What about those of us who can see both the figure and the ground as the figure at the same time? Um, the evidence suggests, and I'm not giving you my opinion, I'm telling you what the research has shown, that there are milliseconds of delay as a person shifts their attention from the figure to the ground. There is a detectable delay, and that's what we call um, this flexibility of attention. You can shift really quickly, and sometimes you don't even feel like you're shifting. You feel like you're paying attention to everything. But the truth is, you're actually shifting quickly and automatically between things. It is voluntarily controllable. It's important to keep that in mind that you can decide where to place your attention. People who have uh, attention deficits, where they have diagnosable difficulties with paying attention to what they choose to pay attention to, this is the part of attention that they're actually struggling with, is that voluntary control aspect of it. They don't have trouble applying attention in certain circumstances. They, in fact, can get really fixated in certain circumstances. What they're struggling with is paying attention to things that they need to voluntarily say, okay, I need to focus on this. I need to pay attention. I need to be listening. A lot of times it has to do with stuff that they don't find intrinsically interesting, or things that they don't really value, perhaps that they know they have to value it, but they don't really value it. That kind of thing. Voluntary control over our attention is something that can be trained, right? You can learn what is important enough to pay your attention to and what is not important enough that you can go ahead and ignore. So it is voluntarily controllable. What some researchers think, or some theorists say, is that our attention is like a spotlight. And just like a spotlight, it can move. Whatever you are currently illuminating with your attention is the part that you will notice and you'll pay attention to, that you'll remember later on, those kinds of things. Everything that's in the dark background there that's not being illuminated is very unlikely to be noticed, is very unlikely to be remembered later. And that's going to be something that you're going to remember throughout this chapter, is that we have a narrow band, a spotlight of attention. It can move, it can be pulled, it can be pushed, right? It is controllable. But if you don't even know that there's something out in that black background that's worthy of your attention, and it doesn't pull your attention over there, and there's nothing else that drives your attention over there, you're not going to notice it, you're not going to remember it. It's like it never happened. All right, so let's talk about some of the basic characteristics of attention. Some parts of attention happen before you really start consciously attending to information. You start processing parts of the information before you really pay attention consciously aware of paying attention. So pre-attentive processes are those things that happen before you're even clearly aware of the stimulus's details. This kind of processing happens without any kind of effort. It just automatically happens. You may not even know that you did this kind of processing. Some examples of the kinds of things that happen pre-attentively would be things like the passage of time. I notice in my classes when I'm lecturing live that in a 50-minute class period, about 30 minutes in, everybody starts shifting all at one time. Everybody's like suddenly gotten uncomfortable. They maybe are ready to look at something else. 30 minutes seems to be the shift moment. And probably the reason why it so consistently happens, and it doesn't matter what subject I'm teaching, it could be something super engaging, it could be something very boring like research methods, it could be any subject. About 30 minutes in is when I start to see everybody shifting. And it's probably because 30 minutes, your brain kind of processes that without paying attention to it, and your brain is starting to think, aren't we getting close to this being over with? Aren't we almost done? And good news is you are more than halfway through the class. But it's something that happens without even knowing that you're doing it, that you're paying attention to the passage of time. Other things would be, your position in space is another thing that happens pre-attentively. You know whether you're upright or upside down right now. You know whether you are roughly facing north, south, east, or west, roughly. Within the hemisphere, you'll probably be right. These are things that happen without any kind of effort, without any attention being placed. Post-attentive processes are those things that are going to happen after you've become aware of the stimulus. Now that you're paying attention to it, you're going to be able to exert some kind of effort and actually deliberately process that information. So we're going to be a lot more interested in those kinds of things that happen with effort, because the ones that happen pre-attentively, you generally don't have any control over. They're just happening. So we're going to focus most of our attention on these post-attentive processes. All right, so let's give an example of pre versus post-attention, and let's see how many circles are on this array. I'll bet you were able to very quickly, probably before I could even shift sentences, before the period was completed, you were able to say 3. How about now? All right, that second one was probably harder. So 3 happens automatically. You don't even have to pay attention to what was coming up. You knew that there were going to be circles, but you had no idea how big. You didn't know where. You didn't know what color they were going to be. They could have been dots, and I called them circles. They could have been 3 giant things covering the entire screen. It could have been anything. You had no idea what it was going to be. But as soon as you saw that cluster, you probably, as an adult, you probably very automatically knew that was 3 circles. Now, if I got my 3-year-old grandson in here and I asked him, I'm not even sure can count to 3 yet, so he certainly is not going to do this automatically. He's not going to automatically know that that's 3. He might know if I showed him these 3 and then maybe showed him 2. If I asked him if there was fewer now, he'd be able to answer the question, more or less. But he couldn't say 3 because that's an effortful task for him still, because he's learning how to count. For an adult, you already know 1, 2, 3 really fast, and so you can do that really quickly. With this larger number, this is too many for you to do in an automatic process. So you're going to have to actually exert some conscious awareness. The first 3 is in a pre-attentive process. It's called, I thought it was going to illustrate. Hold on, I'll show you the name of it in a second. The full thing is a post-attentive process, so you're going to have to put some effort into that full string of 7. The pre-attentive version, where there's only 3, if there's 4 or fewer items, in fact, you can subitize. You basically, at a glance, see the quantity and you can name it. It's quick and effortless, especially you know your numbers so well. It doesn't take you any energy to subitize 4 or fewer items. When it's longer, you're going to have to enumerate. You're actually going to have to count. And that's slower and more effortful. So for us as adults, 7, 8, 9 objects is going to take I'm not even sure it would take as much effort as, my grandson who's learning to count. He might still exert more effort on three than we would on seven or eight because we clearly know the names of the words. We know what to look at as we're thinking the words. So I'm not sure even eight for us would be as effortful as three for him. But I think you're getting my point that, for us, a larger number is going to take some degree of effort. A smaller number, four or fewer, is going to take really no effort for us at all to label. So even with things like counting or recognizing quantity, uh, even those kinds of things can have that attention component to it, right? Where you don't really have to think about it. The stimulus arrives and you automatically process it. You automatically notice what you need to know about that stimulus. All right, let's go ahead and stop here and let's come back in the next video and we'll start talking about the different models of how attention works.